Hey everybody, and I want to apologize for being so late with this video. I had to make a quick business run, so I'm sorry I didn't put it out there in the afternoon noon. But we getting this video out. This is part three of Black History Month, learning about our people. So you saw my, I believe it's Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, I believe, my intro video. So please check my full video, number three, on YouTube or Land of Milk and Honey on YouTube to see the full video. If you haven't seen part one, part two, and now we're gonna have part three this evening, please check it out. And let's, as a people, as a beautiful, strong culture of Black people, let's support each other. Let's support the truth. Let's support God's word. Let's support learning about who we are so we know where God is taking us in the future and our generation. And anybody else of other cultures who want to learn about who we are, you're more than welcome to do that. So anyway, let's get to where we left off earlier. And we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of run through the global slave trade, which leading to the Americas and the British and the Barbados. So that's what we're going off today. Hopefully I don't have to do a part four. Hopefully this is it. But if I have to go over to part four, then so be it. Tomorrow will be the last day, which is Thursday. Today's Wednesday evening, early evening. We will roll over until Thursday, which will be, number four. But I hope we can get it in on today, Wednesday, early evening. Hope we can get it in. So thank you for your support for those who have liked my songs, Land of Milk and Honey, on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and my Facebook. The Holy Spirit is moving. Like the Bible says, if you are a believer, you got the Holy Spirit in you. If you're a true believer, devoted believer, a loyal believer, the Holy Spirit is in you. Okay, so let Him lead you as an individual, as a culture. You cannot go wrong with God. You just can't, period. Okay, so that's what I'm about, and I pray that's what you're about. So let's go celebrate this amazing culture of my people, ups, downs, highs, and lows. Let's go. Well, I'm back. Just have to collect my notes, collect myself real quick. We're good. So, we're, going back to number two. Is my camera real quick? Okay. Going back to tape number two, you saw that we kind of talked about Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 68. Number one was if we obey the Lord, His commands, decrees, He would bless us and bless our people, and everyone in the whole world will know the way He's chosen people. We're the one of Egypt after 430 years of bondage, being taken out, trying to take us to our destination was the land of milk and honey. That was going, in Deuteronomy, kind of like a refresher, a reminder of God's chosen people. If you obey me, this is the great things. I'll bless you and favor you. But if you don't obey me, going on to Deuteronomy 28, I believe it's 15 to 68 or 16 to 58. This is the thing that will happen to you. You get the curses and you'll be in bondage and scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And brothers and sisters, Black people, that is exactly what happened to us because we did not obey the Lord. We did not give God his total praise and worship and credence. We wanted to do our own thing. So what did He do? We were scattered from the four corners of the earth, which means we were, shipped to every single nation in the world. Not a nation who didn't have us as their servants, slaves, bondage. There's not one country in the world we can say that didn't have African slaves. So that's our curse. That was a curse because we didn't listen to God. We didn't listen to the God who created us, and so that's what happened to us. Now, deriving from that, we're coming to a little history, a light little history. I did a lot of research, watched a lot of footage of, great historians and, offspring of some of these slaves. I mean, I'm not saying we as Black people, all of us come from these slaves, whether it's Barbados, Caribbean, whether it's Sierra Leone, North or East Africa, Motherland, Negroland. We all have some of these people that they saw in the books. They're all relatives. They really are. If you do a lot of homework, they really are. You find that some of our great, 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 great were part of that slave taken away or kidnapped. Okay, so now I watched a video I recommend you to watch. It's called 1,000 Years a Slave. It's on, you can find it on YouTube, maybe Instagram, Google it. It is an amazing depiction, fact and truth. Lots of documents and books that prove um, that we are the ones in Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 28. That's Black people, that's the Negro, that's the African, that's totally us. First off, God said it, so that's you're gonna believe Him. If you're a believer, you will believe His truth. And then number one, the actual, the people who actually are in Deuteronomy, He's speaking about it proved through the slave trade, global slave trade. It proved that. So it's like, what more proof do you need? Come on. We're going to start with first that white supremacy is an English invention, which means it came from Britain, England, Europe. It's a invention that was franchised by several different European countries. And white supremacy is to intimidate, it was to intimidate, to put a lot of fear into the African slave, the African people, and, make us feel less than, intimidated by your power. So you use that, to make us afraid, to make us basically stay in line with our slave masters and traders. So that's how that came about. That's number one. Then we're going down. It's called open wounds. Open wounds. Now tell me, Black people, Negro people, do you think to this day we still do not have open wounds that have not been healed, not been rectified? Can you really say, as a African Americans, and our great and amazing ancestors all the way down from Egypt, okay, all the way back from Egypt, if you read the word, all the way back from Egypt, do your homework as well, historical documents and pictures and, evidence. Do you think that as the first bondage was in Egypt, do you think from Egypt all the way down to the Caribbean, to the Latin America, and African slaves, to the Europeans, to the Arabs, do you think we have not had wounds from our great ancestors all the way to this 2023? Have we not had open wounds? Well, this is going back to the time of the 17th, 16th, 15th century. Shall we begin? Let's go. Okay, so Barbados, which is in the Caribbean, Barbados, in the middle of the 17th century, a small island, the most profitable of all of England's colonies, and thriving trade was, they really thrived. Um, Europeans really thrived in Barbados and the Caribbean or on the sugar plantations. Barbados had a lot of natural sugar. You made a lot of money from that because the whole world needed sugar, right? Sugar is a sweetener, a natural sweetener, who, they've turned into chemicals and made it white, made it, different things, but it's so sweet. So that was very valuable in that period of time. Um, in the land. The small island was owned by the British settlers. The labor was performed by enslaved Africans. Um, It's called Bridgetown Harbor. Bridgetown Harbor, where the slave ships first hit the land. It's called Bridgetown Harbor, where the slaves ships first hit the land of Barbados. Uh, excuse me. 2 months of travel came. It took 2 months to get there from Africa. Okay. The Africans were crying and probably pleading and begging and scared out of their wits with their wits end. Where am I going? Where am I going? And they were kidnapped. They weren't persuaded to come. They were kidnapped to come. So you were forced to come, leave your country, forced to come to a place you have no idea about, with by people who are very disrespectful, very brutal, and very cruel, and very deceiving. So um, then it says the females had their genitals pulled. They would pull the genitals when they got to the harbor. I guess kind of like I'm gonna test and see if you have the goods, if you're strong enough, if you can produce babies by having a strong female genital. And the men had their, I don't want to be too graphic, had their testicles pulled for strength and see can they produce babies through these slaves to produce more offspring and more enslaved Africans through the children, the next generation. Okay. Um, they were oiled and made to look the best. You know how when you work out, your body's right, you get oil, these make you look more appealing. They oil them, probably with some kind of animal fat, or whatever. They oil them to make them look more appropriate for sale. Europeans rushed to buy. Europeans who occupied Barbados, probably by force or colonization, they rushed to buy. Right, rushed to buy them because they bought land obviously, and they had sugar plantations. So they're like, oh yeah, we could use these healthy, strong, virile black men and virile African women, um, the men, so to work these plantations. So you want to give them your best look, your best servants. That's what they did. Okay. Um, Once you were of African origin, you were property. Your friends and your family were separated, never to see one another again. Ships had millions of Africans on it with mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents. You guys, that's only Barbados. This is like we're doing Barbados. Just imagine around the world. Many other enslaved who worked on the sugar plantation in Barbados were shipped to were shipped. They were shipped from West Africa. Okay, the Portuguese were the first ones to enslave the African on the Atlantic trade. The Portuguese. Okay, they established a presence here in West Africa in the 15th century with the blessing of the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church, you guys, not to get too further deep in it, but the Catholic Church have a lot of sin. They have a tremendous amount of sin, in their underneath they built. They, they organized slavery. They approved of slavery, of human labor, human trafficking. The Catholic Church, you guys, they had a big hand and a big pot in the finances of this, economics of this, as well as the approval of this. Okay, Catholic Church. The Catholic Church um, divides the world in half. The Spanish colonized the Western Atlantic world. The Portuguese get to trade along the west coast of Africa. Okay, the trade includes gold, ivory, and people. You guys, now the Catholic Church approved all of this. They approved all of this from the Spanish to the Portuguese, the first ones who kidnapped the African slaves. Okay. Okay, so it goes back to European powers competing for a piece of the action. So all these Dutch and Swedish and Paris and England and Britain and you name it, they competed to get these in it's not indentured, but enslaved Africans. They competed for um, the people. And then it says many millions of Africans were violently abducted from their homes. Not all of them made it. Not all of them, millions. Not all of them survived through that journey. As far as the coast, a lot of them didn't make it. They did not make it. The slave traders wanted young men and young women. And if they did, the one that young men and young women, and why? Because they were the most virile. They were young. They had more energy. They could, do more work without getting tired. So they would kill the old Africans and the ones who had no value, and they would definitely kill children. So they did that because they let the ones with no value would have not made it along the trip as well, and they wouldn't probably produce as well, work wise. So just think about that, you guys. A Sioux castle where the Danish built a fort, naming it the Christi Jan Bolk after their king in the 7th century, 1694 to 803. They shipped 100,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. This is the Danish, another European nation. 100,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. Have you ever heard about this in junior high school? I didn't. I never heard about this in preschool in junior high and high school. I didn't. Left fathers, I know we got like what 6 pages of African slavery, 6 pages, maybe 5. So I never heard of this. So this is, it was kind of like, I knew some things, but some things I did not know. Okay. And then so Carly shells, they use Carly shells. They look like little, when you go to the beach, they call Carly shells in the Caribbean, Carly shells. They would buy slaves with Carly shells. And they look like the little small, like little seashells that you get, like the small little seashells, like when we sisters braid our hair in cornrows, and we have like the little shells. That's what they look. That's what they look like, the natural shells. And they traded. That was money back then. And they traded people, bought them through cowrie shells. Okay, and gold would pay for a person, a slave. The slaves were housed in a tiny room or space, like they did when you see pictures of Ghana, how they house them in those little stone little house with little wood windows or something to get air. And that room would take up to 200 people in one room. Now, mind you, you guys, they didn't have bathrooms. What they did was back in those days, they would go outside, dig a hole, and use the bathroom. Maybe use leaves to wipe yourself. But imagine being in one of those little small places with 200 people or more, and you have to go to the restroom, pee, number one, number two, and you have basically probably no way to wipe yourself. You're just pooping on yourself or peeing on yourself. Imagine that. So all the foot castles along the coast, all the floors are raised up. Their floors raised up, you guys. It was flat, but it raised up. Why did it raise up? Because of all the impacted skin. You have to, when you wash yourself, your skin, old skin, falls off in the water and the soap in the shower. And they had a lot of skin, 200 people or more. And the debris, the wind blowing in papers and all kind of little other stuff, debris, little trash. And then you had human waste of the slaves. Now imagine that. Not only the smell was horrendous, but it was germs, and some probably got sick and maybe even died, because of that. And it got on their bodies. So imagine that. Imagine that. Okay, an estimated 12 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 1 million did not survive. So you got 12 million shipped to the New World. 1 million did not survive. Can you imagine that? Oh my God, it's so horrendous. Hundreds of years of bodies of the Africans were thrown overboard the ships like discarding the next day trash. If you didn't make it, you see the pictures where they were all packed on the ships like sardines. Who does any human being like that and think that's cool? Really? Packed like sardines. So some didn't make it. Maybe they used the bathroom. Maybe they smelled. Maybe they swallowed in some of the the excrement, the urine, the number two, and they got sick. And plus, back in the motherland, Niggerland, Africa, they used nature to heal, natural plants, natural remedies, and you didn't have any down the ship. You were just naked, raw, whatever they said you to do, whatever you could, whatever they gave you, that's it. So you're out of your element totally. And of course you're gonna die. You don't know the area, you don't know the environment, you have no natural anything like home, of course. So they threw you over the ship like you were trash. Babies, elders, women, men, like it was nothing to them because you were nothing but property or soon to be property. So you didn't mean nothing. Okay? The Atlantic slave trade was conducted by Europeans and local partnership by local African leaders and merchants. The slaves could only be fed by canoes by the local people. So obviously they were fed by canoes. So the local people, maybe Europeans who live, by land there, probably gave them food, brought food to the ships. Local people, and then it says also too. It says local African leaders and merchants. So when you say that, we've heard the whole cliche. Well, Africans sold other Africans. Let's get that straight. Why that happened? So black people, let's get that straight. Come on, let's get it straight. When you have any type of war, if you are a nation fighting against another nation, whether you are European, whether you African, whether you Latin, whether you Middle Eastern, when you are fighting a war, let's make common sense and rationale. Even the Bible tells you this. When you are fighting against an enemy at war and you are the victorious one, you're going to have prisoners. You're going to take some of the women and the men and the children. You're going to capture some of them. It's not, and just because we all look alike as black folks, we have different nations among Africa was one of the biggest countries in the world. Okay, you have many languages, many nations of people, but still black people. Let's get it right. And when you have someone you capture and they're not of your tribe, they're not of your same religious belief, they are your enemy, you don't care about them, so you probably would trade them or sell them off. So it didn't mean anything to some of those African leaders because they were only selling and giving away and trading their enemy who they captured. So they would not do that to their own people, they would do it to an enemy. So let's get that straight. Okay, let's get it right. Okay, enough. Now let's move on. Okay. Um, so it says your status was not inherited by your children, but the local Africans would trade other African slaves, as I said, provided human capital for a plantation becomes racialized and commercialized. So they would trade you if you were their enemy. Whether you African, brother, sister, you were not of my nation or my belief, my religious belief. So I'm going to trade you. And any person who has a war does that. They did it in the Bible when they captured, when Israel defeated enemies, that God helped them win battles and fights. They would take some of their property was left over. You know what I'm saying? They weren't. They were black, yes, but they still weren't a part of their tribe, so they were the enemy. So they, their houses are moved in their houses and everything. Let's get that straight, you guys. This is a war, right? Right. So, and then the African slave became human capital, which means you are human property. Okay, and commercialized, it was racialized because you have black skin. That's why the Europeans and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Arabs took us. They didn't care that we were African. They did care actually because they knew that Africans were much harder, much better workers, and stronger and faster workers. That's why they got us. Okay, that's why they captured us. Okay, kidnapped us. But they knew they tried other people. It didn't work as well, so they went to the African, who's one of the strongest people for working and what they wanted. And they didn't just capture us because we were to uh enslave us. Well, I mean, they did, but they also knew that we had natural gifts and skills they could use on the plantations. That's another reason why they kidnapped us too, because they saw and they knew that you always had someone who was selling you out. Always had someone selling you out. Who looked like you, but selling you out once again an enemy. So they told what this African could do, what the African woman and man could do. Oh, natural gifts. We could use them not only to enslave them, hard labor, but they have natural gifts and skills. They can build a house. They was carpenters. They were engineers, naturally gifted, builders, and all kinds of stuff. Great thinkers. We could use them. We really want them. Great value, right? Um, okay, the British treated the Barbados slave, the Caribbean slaves, that pattern other colonies. 1661, the Slave Code. Africans were property and not human beings. 1661. They were never looked at as human beings. They were looked at as, property, treated far worse than they treated their own animals. Far worse. Even the animals got better treatment than the way they treated, my ancestors, your ancestors, black folks. Just know that. Africans were property, not human beings. Within 20 years of the sugar colony, that the black population outnumbered the white folks. White people felt a need for control. You're in Barbados, a total Negro country, and in an island, and you're white, and black people have overpopulated you. You're going to have to take some control. Or you thought about maybe it's too many of them. They're going to overpower us. They're going to overpower us. We need to show them control, and so that's what they did. 1644, before the sugar boom, the black population was 30,000. 800 were African descendant. The rest was in England descent. 1640, before the slave code was introduced, and the sugar production going into overdrive, 27,000, 26,000 whites. If any slave would offer violence to any white Christian, as such slave or that Negro would be severely whipped for the first offense. So if you were an African and you went up against or rebelled or talked disrespectfully, what they thought was disrespectful to a white Christian or a slave master or someone or a slave trader, if you thought you could talk disrespectfully, what they call disrespectfully, your first offense, you would get severely whipped with a horse whip, with an animal whip. Mind you, they didn't even do the animals this way. Because remember again, you guys, we weren't considered real human beings. We were considered less than animals, no soul, no real spirit, no mind, but little children. We were treated like little children, and something worse than little children, severely whipped. Imagine that. Just imagine that. Severely whipped and punished for the first offense. Second offense would be severely whipped and his nose would be split. So if they would whip you, second time as well, severely, but they would split your nose either this way or that way. Split your nose. I'm assuming with a knife or a machete. They would split your nose, and some would be burned in some parts of his face with a hot iron. And the hot iron could be his initials in your face, on your cheek, or your forehead to let people know if they had like the little initials of the slave owner, the slave trader, his initials are burned here in your forehead or your face. Let people know who owns you. And they would split your nose or burn you even. So that's what they did in Barbados. When a really serious offense, with a really serious offense, they would use hot iron made from England to harm the African individuals. You were you were the property of whoever name was on their branding stick, as I said. The brand mark went on your face or your forehead or on your cheek. This law was taken to Jamaica and South Carolina to Jamaica and South Carolina region. They did that in America too, as well. The slave rebellion took place in the island whose name was Bassa. The rebellious um, the rebellion started on Easter Sunday, 1816. So, you guys, on Easter Sunday, 1816, the Jamaicans, Caribbeans, the Barbados, they started a rebellion in 1860 on Easter Sunday, you guys. On Easter Sunday. So, think about that Easter you guys are celebrating here. Um, that was not the native celebration that these brothers and sisters celebrated. That was a total European, a total ungodly celebration that God told us also in His Word not to celebrate because our people didn't celebrate that. Israel never celebrated stuff like that. And we'll get into Easter, the Easter celebration, and why we shouldn't celebrate that biblically later in another tape. But we're just going to say for now, keep it simple. Started on 1816 Easter Sunday, the rebellion. Because what rebellion means? Against, turning away from, right? Rebellion. Dislike something. The epic center for this rebellion was Bailey's Plantation. By an African born of a small group, they understood the condition of freedom. They wanted freedom from this bondage so bad, they put their life on the line at Bailey's Plantation. They couldn't see being a slave forever. They just like, this ain't right. It wasn't morally or spiritually or humanely right. So they wanted to rebel, and they did rebel. Okay, and they understood the cost of being free, like they were back in their country before the Europeans came and the Spanish and the Portuguese came. They were free to do what they wanted to do, and life was good. Okay, he orchestrated a signal that actively spread to the other plantations. So you know how they said we have slave signals, like Sister Harriet Tubman and other slaves, and I'm quite sure Nat Turner and other slaves. They used to meet up, on I think it was Sunday they met up, and they would go to secret places in America. I know, obviously, Barbados they did. These Caribbeans, very obvious they did. They would meet up and they would know the signals, whether it's a song, whether it's a whisper, whether it's a hand gesture, whatever it was. They gave signals to this time. Let's get it going. Let's rebel, and that's what they did. So he orchestrated that. Okay, this brother orchestrated it. Okay, and Pippa Sira rebellion was the first of three major uprisings by the enslaved um, in the West Indies. Number one, early 19th century, folks who have been enslaved in West Africa led some 400 rebellions into the battle with the British. So they really didn't want to be slaves, you guys. They didn't want to be beat up and murdered and families separated, nobody, and treated like worse than animals. They didn't want that. Nobody should be treated like that, but they were. It was more horrifying than what I'm telling you. But they said enough is enough, so they rebelled against the British. The rebellion was heavily crushed by the large British army. They did put, the Caribbean, Jamaica, they not playing. They for real about theirs, and so they definitely did their best to fight against the British, but they were outmanned and outnumbered, and so by the large British army, so they were defeated. Okay, in Ghana, China, 100 miles from 100 in Ghana, it's called Sheba, 100 miles from Ghana, Fort Sean Shabaston. It's called Fort Sean Shabaston, 100 miles from Ghana. One of the oldest slave sites in the country, built by the Portuguese in the 15th century, captured by the Dutch West India Company. 1642. Anton Vel, what is this? Han Amo was buried. He was born in what, 703, 1784. He died in the Ghana Museum. He was as a gift to the German person. So he was Almo. He was a gift to traded to the German person. They enslaved him and so forth. He was the first African to attend a European university, becoming a professor in philosophy and published several important works. He returned to Ghana in 1740s. He had a twin brother who was seized illegally by a Dutch privator and taken to Sierra Num. Amo came back wanting his brother or compensation for his troubles. So this brother Amo came back, trying to get his brother free, and he wanted compensation for all their troubles. Okay, we're still in Barbados. In Barbados, the sugar plantation owned by the Harewood family, that's a white European family, the Harewood family in Barbados. Before 1834, the enslaved were not included in records or of birth certificate or death. They didn't, have record of birth certificate and death because, like I said, they were probably not human beings and they weren't even supposed. They didn't really care about them. So why keep record of you? I know what I did to you. I know what you are to me. I don't need to let anybody know. Um, they were seen as property or chattel. In 1817, the slave registers were introduced. Okay, so that is so far. We still got more Barbados, but this is a little bit, information that I hope you guys, get to see and understand how serious it is. Now we're going to a global trade. A global means worldwide trade. Let's go. Okay. Joseph Amity. Remember that name, 18th century. Joseph Amity. 600-mile journey to Portuguese by a Latin American, Nijo. He was a Negro musician, excuse me, born in Guinea, West Guinea. He was a Negro musician born in West Guinea. His name was Joseph Amity, Guinea of Africa. Sold into slavery by the Portuguese traders, taken to them to Brazil. We have a lot of Negro Brazilians who, when you go to Brazil, you will see them, but they don't show you on the tourists any Negro Brazilians, and we know there's a lot of us there. Okay, Portuguese traders taken by them to Brazil as a boy. He was taken as a boy to Brazil, South America. The vast majority of Africans went to Brazil. So a lot of us Africans went to Brazil, which is pretty much a black nation, another black nation, because majority of them went to Brazil, which is Latin America. Okay, South America plays a very heavy role in the slave trade. Amity was placed in a wealthy home in Rio, which is Brazil, and played the violin with his master. When his master returned from Portugal, he took the boy, on tour with him, places he went. He took the boy with him. He was so good at playing that he became a second violinist to play in the orchestra of the opera at the Lisbeth Lisbeth Opera at 16 years old. He was that phenomenal. Of course, he was phenomenal. Y'all, come on. He was that phenomenal. Okay. Um, this is what they said. These are some of the things they said about the Negro, the black man, black folks. Black folk can be brilliant, but they must not be above their station. We may be intelligent and the most intelligent, as an enslaved person, but don't you dare try to think you're better than me. You stay in your place, Negro. You may be more intelligent than me, you may have it going on more than me, but I'm gonna let you know real quick, you're not better than me. Don't get it twisted. No, I don't think so. And that was the attitude. Okay. or forget that they are slaves to their master. They never let you forget that they know you were smarter than them. They know you had it going on more than them, but they never let you forget you are still a Negro and a slave, and I am your master. So figure, okay? Slavery may have been abolished in Portugal, but slavery was very much alive elsewhere. There was a time when Portugal gave up the slavery, but everywhere else it was still a very profitable thing to have the Negro slave. Okay, um, so Africans continue to be transported across the Atlantic, across the Indian Ocean from East Africa. Now we're going to Venice, Italy, Rome. Venice, the jewel of the Renaissance, had a very dark side. Venice is built on the backs of thousands of slaves being trafficked into this city. So remember, Southern Italians, a lot of them were Negro, Moorish, African, Negro slave. A lot of Southern, if you go back to the history of Southern Italians, Southern Italy, a lot of them were Negroes. And you know where they came from. Okay? The gathering between East and Western Europe, Venice became a leading navy power and relied on maritime trade to survive. Okay? Until the ninth century, the Venetian mansions would sell captive men and women to Islamic nations. Okay, with my camera. To Islamic nations. In 840 AD, they uh, they the treaty outlawed the sale of Christians to Muslims. Venetian traders looked east to fill the demand, selecting captives not by race, so they claim, not by race, but by religion in the Arab countries. Okay, ships docked and unloaded their cargo on the on the place of Point del Ship Pocro or Riva Shikteroni. That's in Italy. Excuse me for the mispronunciation. Some of the slaves were sold to wealthy Venetians. They were valuable assets and were treated accordingly. An overwhelming amount of slaves in Italy or Venetian came from the Black Sea era. Mind you, they came from the Black Sea era. Okay? When they came here, they were converted to Catholicism. So even if you practice Israelite faith, Hebrew Israelite faith, or whatever faith you practice in Africa, Negro land, motherland, you were forced to convert to Catholicism, whether you liked it or not. So that means you're under Catholic rule, right? Okay. They weren't chained or beaten in Italy. They were a huge value. I guess back then, the Italians thought, well, don't beat them. If you beat them, they're gonna rebel, and then they're not gonna want to produce and do work. So treat them, with some type of respect, even though they're still beneath me. They're gonna give you some type of respect. Okay. They were chattel or Chio, a Venetian, a Chow or Chio Venetian. In Venice, in the 1400s, slaves were seen as a status symbol. A staple of luxury would have been um, cetacean slaves. Cetacean slaves. So basically, to have a slave was a high status, which means you had help. You had maids. You had people who were beneath you, and it was like you had money if you had a Negro slave, doing all your errands, doing all your chores for you, free labor. It was a high status in Italy. Okay. 1433 in Venice was a book of records for slave documents. Females, a cessation, Caucasian, excuse me, female, female Circassian slaves were used for domestic help. A beautiful female slave was used for sexual advances, or she was nothing but used for intimacy if she was beautiful. If they thought she was beautiful, nothing but for intimacy, or as a concubine, which is and a, a mistress, pretty much. Concubine, a second woman, and pretty much. So pretty much, she was raped constantly, and she had no real say. Um, okay. Um, in okay, a concubine in the luckiest case, if she was lucky, she was a concubine, which means she probably wasn't beaten, but she was like in America, going to the big house. You're not, they weren't supposed to be beaten, supposed to be taken care of, really, much better than the field Negroes. If you go to the big house, which we know you were still, enslaved. We know that wasn't necessarily true. You were, if you want, if the master's wife wants to slap you, punch you, kick you, if his friends want to rape you, he wants to rape you whenever he wanted to, he could do that. So I don't think that's because you're in the big house, you were treated so well. A slave, you're still a slave, honey. Still property, honey. Okay. So, um, and the children could be legally recognized by their white father or European father or Arab father if you were a female used for sexual advantages, or you were a concubine, you happen to bear kids from this slave master or slave trader, your kids would be respected by their father, recognized, but yet still you still were a slave, and so you still were a slave. Come on. Um, and your kids would not be enslaved if their father was a slave master. Okay, unlike the children born in America or the rest of the world who were born into slavery, but his children at this time in Venice was not considered in bondage. They were free because they were his children. Unlike America and other places around the world, your children were still enslaved just like you. Okay. 876 AD, a law was introduced in Venice that banned all slave trading, but the law was flawed because they didn't want to give up their slaves. Them Italians didn't want to give up their slaves. Regardless of all of that, so kind, treat me so kind, and all of that, you're not going to give up your free service. You mean you got to cook your own food, which means you got to wash your own body, wash your own clothes, cut your own grass, water your own, take care of your own animals, pick up the dog waste and all that. I'm gonna give that up to do it myself. No, and then my status will go down. That means I must be poor. If I can't afford a slave, or I can't afford an enslaved property, human property, I don't want people to think I'm dirt poor now. I gotta keep that status up. So it was more, convenient to keep trading slaves and suffer the penalty because the profits was far too good, and its benefits were tremendously in their favor. Okay, slavery carried on for another 500 years in Venice. So all the good that you're doing, so they so-called treated them, with a little more respect, but you didn't respect them because you still did it for 500 more years. Anyway, enough of that. Okay, the Indian Ocean slave trade is probably the oldest slave trade and transported more human beings, and it was multi-directional, so it went everywhere. The Indian slave trade, everywhere, all over the world. Okay, exports from the Indian Ocean to the Muslim world grew exponentially, hugely. Okay, um, after Arab traders won control over the Swahili coast sea routes in the 8th century, the traffic of millions of human beings from Africa East Coast led to the emergence of the African diaspora communities. That's why we have in colleges Black diaspora, African diaspora, which means all over the world. We would trade all over the world, brothers and sisters all over the world. That's what it means, African diaspora. All over the world, Black folks traded and sold and brutalized. That's what we're talking about. Our people all over the world, African diaspora. Okay? Communities. Like the trading in Pakistan and India, the Afro-Iraqi, remember the Iraqis were Negro as well. We've been everywhere. Everyone touched us, and so um, in Basra, the Islamic law does not permit slave trading of Muslim, your fellow Muslim, throughout the Indian Ocean. But they, of course, they ignored these rules. Of course, they did. They ignored these rules, so they plundered and captured Africans, Indians, Southeast Asians, and non-Muslims. As Christianity and Islam evaluated a person created by God, yet both beliefs capture and enslave the African. So you were looked at and characterized by your belief, whether you're Christian or Muslim. They recognize you. Oh, well, by your beliefs and by what you stood for in that religion. Okay, the Atlantic trade